Hello my dear YouTuber friends, and I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome to this new video, which is a series of videos that I'm hoping to make and aiming to make for Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is back to basics with Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's essentially the idea behind this is that I know a lot of people in my Discord and YouTube comments and even on my live streams who want to learn every single aircraft and every procedure without becoming proficient on some of the fundamental procedures that I believe you should be practicing to become proficient in. I'm gonna be recording these videos on both Xbox and PC. Whatever you learn on one platform can be transferred on the other. In this case, in this video, I'm gonna be using the PC, but you can apply these same procedures and principles over to the Xbox and vice versa. So let's not hesitate. Let's get on with this video. Okay, so let's kick off this first video in the series on the title screen. I'm on the PC version, like I mentioned, but the same principles can be applied to the Xbox. It'll be the same essentially. So on the title screen, I'm assuming most of you, the majority of you, know the basic handling of an aircraft, the fundamentals. Things like your left and right movement, your banking, turning of the aircraft, your pitch, how to climb and descend, how to apply throttle and flaps. If not, if this is your very first flight simulator and you're starting from scratch, I do advise you go over to flight training and at least complete the basic handling tutorials that the simulator offers. Some of the others, the hit and miss, you're basically tied into and restricted to the lesson. So if you want to fly off or practice something else, the lesson will scream at you saying stay on course. At least go and complete the basic handling, how to move left and right, banking, how to pitch, how to move up and down essentially in the air, and your throttle and flaps. Complete this one first so you get an idea of how an aircraft operates. In fact, Aces Down 1 has recently completed one series of videos on the tutorials. I'll link his first one, in fact, in the top right. Go and take a look at that. He's a real-world Cessna 152 pilot, or he was, so he's comparing his own flight training to the tutorials. It's well worth a look. Anyway, let's go back. So I'm assuming a lot of you know the basic fundamentals of the aircraft. And what we'll do first, we'll go to World Map. So if you're on PC or Xbox, just go over to your world map. Have a guess of where I'm going to start. Yep, London City Airport. Find an airport, perhaps in your local area, and a place that you would like to fly around. Take a look at an airport. Take a look around the map to see if there's another airport close by. In my case, why is it not showing? Well, this is Heathrow Airport anyway. It's not showing when I mouse over it for some reason. Does tend to do that from time to time, Flight Simulator. But I know if I take off from London City Airport, I can follow the river around and go and land at Heathrow Airport. Or, if you fancy, you could take off, do a fly around, do a 180, so turn back towards the airport you're taking off from, and land at that. For this video, you may want to follow me. I'm going to take off from London City Airport, so get London City showing there when you mouse over it, or use your gamepad if you're on the Xbox. I'm going to left click on, in my case, and set as departure. I'm not going to set a destination airport. I'm going to follow the river around and do a landing at Heathrow Airport, likely runway 27 right. Or runway 27 left. I'll see which one takes my fancy when I get there. So without that all done, also, when you're choosing an aircraft, For this video, and what I would fully advise, in fact, to learn the fundamentals, which I'm going to teach in this video, choose an aircraft like the Cessna 152 or the Cessna 172. I prefer, and I started with, when I first got Microsoft Flight Simulator, the Cessna 172. So that's the aircraft I'm going to choose. For my livery, you can choose whatever livery you want. Aces kindly did a Hudson livery for me for my Cessna 172 and Grand Caravan, so I'm going to use that livery, but you can choose whichever livery takes your fancy. But I fully advise either the Cessna 172, which are pretty much starter aircrafts, or the Cessna 152 to learn the fundamentals in. So I've got London City selected as my departure airport. Let's go fly. Okay, so I'm lined up, obviously, on London City runway 27 in my Cessna 172. I'm just in external mode at the moment. Now, what we're going to cover in this first video are the fundamentals. So I'm going to climb to 1,000 feet. I'm going to use my trim, because I'm going to be teaching you the fundamentals of trim, and how to trim out to a straight and level flight, so I'm not climbing or descending. I'll be following the river round, the Thames round, like I said, to line up with Heathrow. And then I'll be teaching how to do an approach and how to get your aircraft configured to land. So before we do all that, what we should do first is go to our options. I'm going to press escape in my case, because I'm on PC, escape on my keyboard. If you're on the Xbox, just go to your options, press your options buttons. Going to go to control options. Now, I know where my, make sure your flight controller, in my case, I'm using the Logitech Flight Yacht system. Make sure that's selected. So that should be white up here. Using the gamepad, make sure that's selected. If you're using a HOTAS or joystick, make sure that's selected, obviously. I know where my trims are. But if you don't know where your trim is on your controller, go to Flight Control Services here. If these are open, just click this button here to close all the menus. Go to your Flight Control Services, and you want to go to Control Trimming Services. And it's the elevator trim nose up and elevator trim nose down, your pitch trim, that I'm most interested in. I know, for me, I've got mine set to my rocker on my Logitech Flight Yacht system. I know I've got it set here. And that's the corresponding buttons here. If you didn't know, you could actually go search by input. So if you take a look at your trim nose up and down, and you want to test these out, go by search by input. I'll go trim nose down. And as you can see there, elevator trim nose down. Don't worry about anything else like drone camera. It's not going to affect it when you're in the cockpit. It's not going to take effect when you're in the cockpit. In my case, when I'm in drone camera, it will also pitch my drone view down. But don't worry about that. But I know, and I just made sure that my trim nose down is B1. If I click that, I want to make sure my trim nose up is B2. So I'll press that. Go by search by input again. And I've just clicked my trim nose up button, which is B2. So that's all corresponding correctly. Now if this shows, if it starts to show every control, just go to your filter, go to all, and then go back to assigned, and then collapse all the menus again to take us back to all the menus collapsed view, like so. Also, I wanted to see where my flaps is. I know my flaps are on my throttle quadrant on one of my levers. But to check that, you can go to Flight Control Services again, and then go to Secondary Control Services. And I know that my flaps is on one of my levers, like I mentioned, and that all corresponds correctly. When that's all white, it means flaps are fully up. When it's down, like this, it means your flaps are fully deployed. Like I said, I've got mine on a lever, So I've got it on an axis. You may have yours assigned to buttons. Again, you can search by inputs just to see. And I can see by searching that axis there, my lever, I can see I've got that assigned to flaps. And you can also check where your rudders are, rudder pedals, rudders. So if you're using buttons for rudders, like the Xbox gamepad, for example, typically you use your trigger buttons for rudders. You can search by input and select and see where they are. With all that said, so I know where my flaps are, I know where my trim are. If you don't know where they are, like I said, go to Flight Control Services, Control Trimming Services, and Secondary Control Services to see where your trim and flaps are. And we can go back and resume. Now, weather-wise, I've got it on the Clear Skies preset. I fully recommend this if you're practicing and trying to become proficient in procedures. Put it on Clear Skies. Now, you can delete the bottom wind layer if you want. That will make things a lot easier for you. I'm going to keep it on, but if that's getting in your way, it may bump your aircraft up and down a bit and left and right a bit, because it can become a bit errant, this wind layer. But I'm going to keep it on for this video, but if you want to get rid of it, left click it or use your gamepad to select it, and then you can delete layer. Like I said, I'm going to keep it on. So with that all said and done, let's jump into the cockpit and let's practice some of these fundamental procedures. So just before we take to the air, something else I should mention. Go to your options again. In my case, I'm on PC. I'm going to press escape on my keyboard. If you've got a keyboard connected to your Xbox, you can do the same thing, or press your corresponding button to go to options. Go to control options once you're in options. So I'm going to select that. Ensure once again you got your flight controller selected, and under brakes menu, select that. I'm going to left click it. I know where my brakes and parking brakes are. You may not, so get familiar. Know where your brakes are when you land, you want to brake, and your toggle parking brakes. When you throttle up, you've got to release your parking brakes, so know where these are. So I know where they are, but do become familiar with them. Let's get straight on with this, so let's move the mouse out of the way. I'm going to throttle up, try and go slowly with you here. I'm going to release the parking brakes. Once my speed gets to 60 knots or just over, I'm going to pull up gently with my yoke, in my case, with my flight controller. I'm going to try and stay on center line as well. So just get over 60 knots here. And pull back gently on my yoke, on my flight controller. Now I want to relieve pressure on pulling back. The way to do this is trim. So I'm going to dab slightly longer than a click, little less than a second, trim nose up. It's the best way I can explain dabbing trim. So I'm going to ensure that I can relieve pressure on my bringing back my flight yoke, my controller, to climb. I've let go of it now, so I'm actually using trim to control my climb. So I've let go of the backwards pressure, bringing my flight controller towards me, and I'm just using trim to control my climb, and I'm dabbing trim nose up to get to a climb of a few hundred feet per minute. Fact, it's going beyond a few hundred feet per minute, so I'm just dabbing trim nose down to control my climb there. So as you can see, what is it, 450 feet per minute. I'm coming up to my 1,000 feet altitude. Remember, I've got that bottom wind layer on, so it's blowing me around a little bit. So I'm going to bring my throttle back about a fifth there. And I'm dabbing trim nose down, so I get this black marker showing no numbers on it. It means I'm not climbing or descending. That's why I'm hoping to get it. I'm not going to chase it. I'll dab trim nose up a little bit because I'm descending there slightly, and then dab trim nose down to control that trim. Takes a bit of practice, but these are the fundamentals that I believe you should all be practicing before you go on to more complex aircraft or more complex procedures. There you go, so it's not showing climb or descent now, and I'm around that 1,000 feet altitude, which is great. So I'm just going to control that. I've got that bottom wind layer on clear skies preset, so it may blow me up and down slightly, so I'm just going to click my trim nose down in that case because it started to climb again, and I'm just going to keep an eye on it. I'm nicely trimmed out there, so all I need to do now is follow the Thames around and it should lead me on to Heathrow Airport. So again, I can see I'm slightly climbing. You can also control your level flight by taking back your throttle a little bit or increasing it depending if you're climbing or descending. So if I was climbing slightly there, I would pull back my throttle slightly, and that can also control your trim effectively, whether you're climbing or descending. So I'm just going to bring it back slightest of touch there, and there you go. The wind is blowing me, so it's difficult to tell, but I've got it pretty much in level flight there. Now, Heathrow Airport is just beyond us, ahead there or there. I believe it's over here somewhere. So like I said, I'm just going to follow the river around. The markers should come up. It's used, there's Heathrow Airport. Useful to have airport markers on. I've got all kinds of markers on at the moment. I do apologise. Forgot to turn some of them off. But I know that's Heathrow Airport ahead of us there. And before long it should start telling us. When you're practicing this, at least have those airport markers on, so you can clearly see where you're heading to. And then later on, when you've become more proficient, you can turn them off, of course. So I'm just turning now towards that marker. I simply know by practice that that's Heathrow Airport, and I know it's in this direction to the west. So I'll turn towards there. In fact, is that Heathrow? I made a mistake myself. It will soon become apparent. I am hoping this one is. Ah, completely wrong. It's this one. Well, I knew it was in that direction, and that's why I've got my airport markers on, especially for this video. And it's just a matter of learning these fundamentals. Get yourself flying to around that 1,000 feet altitude. I'm actually just over it there, but I'm going to keep it there. It's around 1,000 feet. I could become a perfectionist and alter that slightly, but I'm just going to leave it where it is. Get yourself so you get yourself in a trimming position where you're neither climbing nor descending. It's just showing nothing. If you're on a Cessna 172, you'll have a 0. I can show that in later videos perhaps, but you'll just have a pointer, and you want it pointing towards the 0, so it's neither climbing nor descending. Once we get nearer to Heathrow Airport, I'm going to configure my aircraft for a landing position. So in that case, I'll be bringing my throttle back to get this arrow pointing towards that white marker, and keep myself at my altitude I am currently, roughly at my altitude I'm at currently, and you should see a white taper come up. I'll show you that once we get nearer. So I'm all leveled out. Bit of wind about with that bottom wind layer, but that's okay. I'll line up with this runway. I think it's 27 right. And practice level flights before you start to move on. So when you want to climb to an altitude under manual control, you can level your aircraft off quite easily once you practice this. Like I said, that's bottom wind layers blowing me around, so I'm just going to bring my throttle back a little tiny bit there, a smudge. And continue on our way to Heathrow Airport. And lots of time to line up with that runway. So now I'm just over 6 nautical miles out. I'll wait till I'm 6 nautical miles out, and I shall throttle back maybe about a third to get that arrow to that white arc there within that white line, and that should bring my speed back enough so I can go to flaps 1 and flaps 2, etc. Let's get back on course with that runway. Lots of time. No worries. I'm under 6 nautical miles out now, so I'm going to bring my throttle back. Maybe just over halfway deployed. And I'm going to trim up so I don't start descending as my engine power is decreasing so the aircraft wants to descend. So I'm going to trim up to counter that. Bring my throttle back a bit more. I'm not slowing down enough. I want to get this white marker here, this white taper on the speed line to where that yellow marker is there, and that should be enough for flaps 1 position. Just keep an eye on my altitude there. I was descending, so I'm just trimming. I'm just dabbing my trim to counteract that. Throttle back a little bit more. And just trimming up a little bit so that I don't start descending. And just practice this at whatever airport or whatever area you're at. Practice it enough times where you become proficient. I can now fly the Cessna 172 anywhere, see an airport or runway late, and I can land quite comfortably because I'm so used to doing it. I've become proficient at landing and flying the Cessna 172 in all weather conditions. I normally fly in live weather conditions. Whatever the weather throws at me, I just fly in. Coming down to my flaps 1 speed now, about 86 knots. We're getting there, you know, that'll do for flaps 1. Flaps 1, I'm going to check outside my left window to make sure my flaps are deployed. Use trim nose down to counteract that flare and trim nose up again so that you stay on a good approach to the runway. I am going to follow the PAPI lights somewhat here. I can now actually go to flaps 2 position there. Check outside my left window to make sure my flaps have deployed again, and they have. And get an approach now where I'm slightly descending, so I'm using trim, dabbing my trim. Should be using throttle from this point onwards, in fact, so let's... my mistake, let's go to throttle. I'm going to decrease my throttle so that I start to get on a good descent path towards the runway. I can see the PAPI lights to the left. I'm slightly high at the moment, so I'm going to continue descending, decreasing my throttle to descend rather, to get 2 white and 2 red. So you can hear the changes in my throttle there. Don't do it too much because you'll start descending too quickly, and we don't want that. Still a little high. So I'll bring that down. Yeah, a bit of a high approach, but practice this. I wasn't paying attention to the PAPI lights there. Now I can see the runway. I'm almost making the runway, almost on the runway. So I can just use my actual yoke and decrease my throttle and then flare, and this is another thing you should practice the landings. Flare to bring your speed right down, and hopefully we'll come to a nice, gentle touchdown, and then brake. Brake, brake, brake. Raise your flaps back up. And then you can go and park if you like. I'm going to park in the middle of the runway again, because I'm a bit of a rebel. So there's the first video in this series. Just the fundamentals. Practice those. Practice trimming so that you can trim at ease at whatever given altitude you want to trim at. And then practice your landings, become more proficient before moving on to more advanced procedures. And we'll cover more advanced procedures in later videos. Things like autopilot. Once you've got these procedures down, then go on to autopilot and flying in other aircraft. So let me know your thoughts on this video and on this series in general, the idea of it. Give it a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it, subscribe for more, many more of these flight simulator type videos on the way, and I'll see you soon.